Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of Perception Action Journal Club. Happy New Year. Happy 2026, everyone. The big pleasure to be joined by Marianne and Andrew again, of course. This edition, we're on to chapters 24 and 25. We're almost, after this, only one left. So, and then maybe our overall reflections or something like that.
Yeah, seriously.
These are a couple of really enjoyable. I enjoyed them a lot. Really getting into the nitty gritty and even the stuff I know quite well. Turvey puts his spin on it and says, I'm like, that's really, really captures something I've never really thought about. So I did enjoy reading. So the first, basically, not quite, but 24 is mostly about vision, right?
Yeah.
Ambient optics. 25 is mostly about touch and haptics and dynamics. If I would parse it, they're not exactly like that, but what I like about one of the things I really like he emphasizes, and I think we keep needing. I think Gibson did well. One thing there's a lot of Bernstein in 24, which he emphasizes the parallel between Gibson and Bernstein, which I always think there's a lot.
Yeah,
but also like keeps talking about the job of perception is not to create a model of the world. It's not to understand the world. It's to act on the world, right?
Yeah.
That's the job of what we're trying to achieve. So it really starts with that. Lots of animal examples for you, man. So where should we start? Any kind of opening thoughts on?
Can I?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. No, I'm just thinking. So right at the beginning, because he starts. It says it has to work for all animals. All six kingdoms, as he puts it. But then he talks about the sort of incorrigible basis. And I think the thing that he keeps going to is that there's something lawful about it, which I find interesting. That perception isn't, when we talk about, that's your perception, in that colloquial language, it's almost like, well, that's something that isn't actually lawful. Yes. I think that's a key bit that he really brings through at the beginning of this chapter, isn't it? Well, it was for me. It stood out for me.
Well, so this is a real Turvey move, and this was a bit of a Gibson move as well, is that reserving the term perception to mean interacting with lawfully created information and directly perceiving the property that created that information. That loop, those things, that's what perception is. And everything else is a colloquial use of the word perception, right?
Yeah.
Like you can talk about, perceiving, a vibe or whatever, but one of the arguments in the ecological approach, and from Turvey in particular, has been that perception is a technical term.
Yeah.
And if you're not perceiving an affordance via specifying information, then you're doing something else. And what that is
talking about,
And look,
I like that.
State of affairs. He uses words like incorrigible, actual state of affairs.
Yes.
Very.
And the thing that made this reminded me of, actually, is a couple of things, but there's been a real move in the ecological approach over the last few years. Not everyone's on board with this. But part of it is, I realized it comes from people trying to make the ecological approach and an activism work together. And so the notion of affordances as relations, the notion of information possibly being non-specifying, the notion of various, a lot of that comes from people who are actively interested in trying to make ecopsych and activism work together, because there's obvious reasons as to why you might try and do that. But it's really interesting is that the things that Turvey sets up here, he sets them up, and they're the kinds of things that an activists are actually kind of bothered by. And so if you're trying to make ecopsych and activism work together as radical theories of cognition, then something has to give. And a lot of people have been pushing that the Turvey stuff has to give, that affordances aren't properties, they're relations, that information it's not just about laws, it's about other things. So I have very strong opinions about this. I think it's a terrible idea for ecological psychology to abandon this. I think the whole point of the book is that Turvey's setting it up that it's really important that we have this, and that the reason why we get to be different from everything else is laws. And if you throw that away, then actually we're just like everybody else, I think. However, there are many other. I just kind of wanted to float that. You're right, Marianne, to identify that that's really key here.
He sets it up so explicitly. I mean, in his own language, but
he is
very explicitly at the beginning.
He is not subtle about it.
No.
But I guess I wanted to identify that not everyone's on board with it, right? That some Tony Chamaris, some of his stuff, Rob Withergen, Luca Van Dyke, some people, right? So anyway, just to
would we be wandering too much off piece to explore this? But obviously, things like I don't know, cultural norms will impact the salience maybe of affordances, or whether we choose them, or the value. That's very different from affordances not being lawful, though, to me.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the argument, right? So my understanding of the move to treating affordances as being relational is the desire for there to be a perceptual story for things other than the control of action, for things like how we interact with culture and social norms and language and things like that. And so the problem is that if affordances are just properties of the environment that are action relevant, that makes them a fairly constrained class of things, actually. But there's a whole bunch of other behaviors that don't immediately lend themselves to an affordance story based on that. But eco-psych needs affordances. So if an ecological story of something has to have affordances, so we need to expand the notion of affordances. I think that's a mistake, but I think that that's the good faith motivation for these moves, for exactly that, to try and engage with things like, how does culture affect our behavior? How do social things get in? How do non-physical, mechanical things get in and affect that? Because they clearly do. Mm-hmm. The question is how. I think affordances is the wrong place to go.
Yeah.
But I agree.
Sorry.
And Turvey does too.
Yeah, for sure.
By that. Like Turvey's affordances don't let you do that stuff.
But they're still linked to intention, aren't they? He still talks very specifically, especially in the next chapter, the difference between Bernstein and Pavlov.
Yes.
So that fits. Maybe the relational bit, maybe, I don't know, I'm just thinking about, and it's probably a bit complex pulling through those weeds, but also being scaled to action capabilities at the moment in time. So those are two things that do influence affordance, regardless of whether they're relational or not.
Yes. I think that's
what I really like. He really hammers the relationship. Like, I love his phrase, like he talks about time to contact, distance to contact, but also torque to contact, work to contact. Right. Like just expressing the perceptual in terms of act. That's what we care about, really. How long it takes to get something, how far away it is, who cares, right? And we want to act on it. How much effort is it going to take us to get there? Yes. Is what we really care about in the end.
We've got some comments popping up as well, actually.
Yeah.
I can say, just stuff and some great arguments. Oh, I haven't read that. Somebody.
Wow.
Incompatible with an activism. Yeah.
Yeah. But, so somebody's just commenting about stuff, Reagan. I like Tom, and I think he's a smart guy, but I think he's wrong about a few things quite importantly. And I think, there were some weird slips going on. The thing, right? At the end of the day, the thing I like about this book is that Turvey isn't being apologetic or slippery or anything. He's being and especially in this chapter, really, really manifests in this chapter. He's not being subtle, and he's not fudging a damn thing. So at the very least, you know where he stands.
Yes. Yeah. I think he's laying out an agenda for how to study this in a very, as a scientist, and in a very rigorous, where there's not much room for, So yeah.
Well, he thinks because again, the whole point is all those previous chapters about all the previous different kinds of ways of going about studying perception and action. They're all identifying that they're all basically this Cartesian stuff, and they all fall foul of the same problems. So there's a really big responsibility to explain, everyone else thought they were different and were going to solve everything and not run into the same old problems. But according to Turvey, they all did. And now he's laying out the ecological approach. And we're also saying we're different. We're not going to fall foul to all the same problems. So we owe a story about how we're going to avoid all those things. And his story is laws, right? Laws are the key. And so I do think that if anybody wants to mess with laws, is within the ecological approach about affordances and whatever, then you owe us a story about how you're going to not simply fall into all the old traps, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he even puts biology and psychology on that scale. Where is it? Yeah. Next thing he does, isn't it? He's got the quantum and the relativity physics.
Yes.
Psychology go in there. He's saying they are lawful.
Yeah.
Yes.
I guess what we say, maybe physics needs to catch up and give us some help here in this space. But
yeah, absolutely, right? Because physics has been concentrated on right. Okay, so we're talking about the figure on page 370.
Yeah, sorry, I moved on a page.
Well, but he's talking about the fact that like all of this is about laws, and all of this is very grounded in a notion of physics, but it's ecological physics. It's not relativity, and it's not quantum physics. It's the physics of the ecological scale, which has boundaries and which you don't reduce to quantum, or you can't. And so I think what you just said, Marianne, is a great way of phrasing it. Is that actually we do need some help from some physicists.
Yeah.
They've given us some help, right? They've given, because Newtonian mechanics and all the dynamics stuff, physics of projectile motion, all that, a lot of that is relevant to the, I use all of that in the throwing work, right? And so, but I think physics has gone off in two directions, right? The very fast and the very big, or the very, very small. And what we need is more work on the medium-sized stuff. That's been left to biology or psychology, but actually, no, we need the physics of it too, because it's different, but it's still lawful.
Yeah. You
right.
Link those two together better. Right?
Yeah. Whereas so for Turvey, affordances are ecological physics things, but they're not reducible to quantum anything. They're not reducible to so this is where people get weirded out, I think, is that Turvey really wants affordances to be physical things.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a concern of, we can't reduce it to physics. Well, we can't reduce it to the science of physics that we currently have. What we need is an ecological scale physics that's based on the same sorts of law-based principles, but just applied to the scale. And Gibson did some of that. The first 4 chapters of the Gibson 79 book is talking about the physics of the world at an ecological scale, right? But he was a psychologist doing it. Let's have some physicists do it too.
And he talks about it needing to still be related to intention, doesn't he?
Yes.
Again, you don't completely move away from the organism environment interaction. Habitat and niche he brings back in again.
Absolutely not, right? Because the organism environment system is the unit, right? But it's still made of stuff. It's still made of pieces, right? Just because when it comes together and works, you have to, behavior comes out of how these things are connected and interrelated. But there are still things that need to be connected and interrelated into a system. And one of them is affordances, and one of them is effectivities, and some of it's information and some of it's not, right? So, yeah. Sorry, one of my rant hats on, I think.
No, I like
we knew we were going to enjoy these 2 chapters, and
but you're right. Turvey's really he's banging on about some really important stuff, and he's being very unapologetic, and he's setting a stance, right? Which is good. I think that's healthy, right? At least you know where you stand. If you want to disagree with him, fine, but at least you know what you got to do and what you're up against. Yeah.
He's doing the Gibson, that the information is in the spatial temporal structure, not just the spatial structure, not just the snapshot, right? Yeah. The depth, we're covering depth. It becomes trivially easy when you take into account optic flow, not just size, like a 2D image, right? So he does some calculations,
Yeah, like I say, Bobby brings things like talk to contact. Work to contact brings him.
Right. So that's the move that he makes, right? So they're starting to talk about the optical basis for getting around among things. And it's about optic flow. And again, so it's, there's the distinction of there's physical optics, physiological optics, and ecological optics. They're all legitimate ways of describing what light gets up to.
Mm-hmm.
But the mistake was to think that only one of them, the physical optics, is the real one, right?
Yeah.
they're all real, and they're all legitimate ways of going about doing things, but only one of them is immediately relevant to behavior. So if you want to study how fast light moves or something about wavelengths, then you don't do ecological optics and optic flow.
Yeah.
But if you want to understand how organisms come into contact with their environment and then proceed about getting among things, then you have to start with optic flow. And optic flow is it begins with visual solid angles rather than points, for example. And those visual solid angles flowing and transforming over time, for example. And so it's again, the argument is,
to describe it as how light is affected by things, I think.
Yes.
It was something like that.
Yeah.
Where is it? There's a good, I know that quote. It is an enterprise. Yeah, so ecological optics is an enterprise directed at the nature and status of ambient optical distributions prior to living things and perforce independent of the stimulation of receptors. So basically, the optic array is what happens before an organism shows up in the room at all.
Yeah.
Which is another thing that bugs the inactivist and the ecological psychologist trying to do in activism. This is the other thing I was reading about today and reminding myself of. People get nervous about information, that there being information about something before the organism's involved.
That's what makes it powerful, though, isn't it? And whether the organism is attuned to it and can pick it up is different to whether it's there. There's a lawful reality in how light is affected by the things.
But this is important, right? So if ecological optics is about the state of affairs of light at an ecological scale prior to being detected by an organism, then that means that what the light's about is set already, right? What it's about the property that created it, and those properties can be affordances. Again, this is why all of this is interconnected. This is why Turvey insists on affordances being environmental properties, is so that they can create information in the light prior to anybody coming, so that when I walk into an illuminated room, the variables are there and are what they are, and they don't need me to process them. They don't need me to transform them. All my job is to detect them. But again, this is becoming complicated. People are getting really weird about it, and it's
and that's where the picking up information. That's why he says the expression being like picking up information. It's already there. Like tau exists independently of it, because it doesn't have to be computed, enhanced, anything. It's a fact of the physics of something moving towards a view, like something. Right?
I mean, I really like that. I find it comforting that there is, there is some kind of lawful objective environment, and various species, like you say, evolved to be able to operate within a niche and a habitat, and then the niche, the way in which they need to operate. But what they're doing is, they're not changing or processing or anything else. The information that's there, they're tuning, or they're perceptively tuning the information that they need in order to survive, go about their business.
And I suspect it's really important that that's the case.
Yeah.
If the meaning of information has to be negotiated with the organism, then it's kind of up for grabs what the information is, and the fact that we've all
objective reality.
There needs to be some truth to all of this, because the success and failure of my actions depend on me being correctly attuned to the actual physical demands of my environment, right? In the sense, so if I'm acting inappropriately because I'm tuned into the wrong variable, or because I've decided that it means something else, I will die. Like it won't just go a little bit wrong. I will slip and
a car.
I will get hit by a car, right? So the truth of the truth of an action is established within a physical frame of reference. And if we don't have access to that, if we don't have perceptual access to that at some appropriate scale, right? Not, at the ecological physics, if we don't have access to the proper ecological physics, then our behavior simply will not be appropriate to what's going on. And if our actions are not appropriate, it's not a bit of a problem, it's an absolute disaster, right?
Rob, I can't remember where it was, whether it was this conversation or something else, but you talked a lot about, we are so good at moving. All organisms are so good at moving.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time we get it absolutely right. And it's really important. It's really dexterous. There has to be a law. If it was open to interpretation, we just wouldn't get it right so effectively. I can't remember when you said that, but it was something really stuck in my mind. Of course it is.
I used to, when I first started stuff like time to contact, I used to point out, I used to do research where people overestimate it. People would make errors. And I was Ryan out Bootsmell credit. He came out to me. He's like, if people are making so many errors, why aren't we all dead?
Yeah.
Right? If you're constantly making these errors, you can't be, right? You're finding these unique, like it's like a constant illusion. Like if we're constantly misjudging things, how are we alive? Right?
Yeah.
Because they do have dire consequences, right? But yeah, and I like it. Just kind of it avoids some of the problems. Like if there's no order, if meaning is inside our heads and created, like how are there any laws that order at all?
Yeah.
Like you have to appeal to God or something that gives us all the same.
Yeah. And multiple
versus order in the environment. That's much more appealing to me.
Yeah.
Me as well. Yeah. And I watch my dog, who's a collie, so movement is his thing. He knows more about. I mean, I remember somebody saying to me, "Don't chase him because you'll learn that he can run faster than you." And I'm like, you can't pretend to a collie. He knows what everything can do. Like thing. But if there wasn't anything lawful, like just that whole interacting as a multi-species world wouldn't exist, would it? I mean, he is so good.
If things weren't lawful, you'd get all the theories we encountered at the beginning of this book.
At the beginning, yeah.
Right. That's I keep thinking about this notion of everything was basically a version of the same failed theory, except for Gibson.
Mm-hmm.
And the key to the difference, and this is Turvey's trying to make this clear, the key that actually makes us different, and not just another failed example of the same doing business with just fancier Bayesian mechanics or whatever. The thing that makes us different is laws. Nobody else thought there could be laws of perceiving and acting. And demonstrating that there are, and demonstrating that they create information and that we resonate to that information and that we use it, etc., is really important. And again, I get nervous when people start chipping away at it because I think that we've accidentally forgotten the centrality of laws. Mm-hmm. The Blau and Wagner undergrad textbook, that's kind of a follow-up to this, that sort of translates it down for an undergraduate curriculum, puts laws front and center as the distinguishing feature of ecological psychology. And I think that was an amazing, it was perfect, right? Because it's the thing that makes us different. Yeah. But then how they work means you have to know a lot of maths.
Yes.
I did notice.
I skipped over.
I was hoping I could skip over because you two, I was like, these two will know the maths, so I'm going to skip it.
I went through a long time ago. But,
Is it with the other two things that stood out, I think, in this is, and I know 24 is more around optic flow and optics, and 25 more around, touch and mechanical information. But again, one of the things he brings up fairly early is that they're not totally separate. They're part of the same system, and there's redundancy in this system.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. When I was in Scotland, I was walking and doing some, like winter mountaineering, I was really aware of, like, visually I'm looking at the path in front of me, but because I'm stood on, like sheet ice in one place and grippy stuff, I was really aware of how much I was using proprioceptive information from my feet, the contact with the ground, as well as visual and everything else, massively, especially in that kind of environment, to be able to move quickly over that environment.
So when we get into that chapter, we should talk about that in more detail, because it's really
he kind of flags it at this one and he digs into it a bit more in the next one, doesn't he?
Well, because he gets the opportunity to, because he's talking explicitly about haptic array stuff and dynamic touch stuff. So there's some really nice, because of course we focus on vision, but the idea is that haptics is, it's exactly the same kind of system as vision. It trades the same kind of variables. Those variables are lawfully created in the medium of the haptic system, which is the body.
Yeah, there's degeneracy within the two things. So
there's degeneracy, absolutely right. There's redundancy; those things are the same.
Yeah.
I'll note one thing he very briefly mentions, but doesn't spend any time on. So this notion of a global array. So we have the optic array for vision and the haptic array. Stoffragen and Barty in 2001 published a paper proposing a global array, and the idea was that there's no specification within the optic array or within the haptic array or within the acoustic array, but specification spans all of it.
He does lightly say it, doesn't he?
So
yeah.
So I remember I remember Tom came to give a talk when I was at Indiana. He came to give a talk about this stuff around about the time he published it. And I remember talking to Jeff Bingham, and I remember Jeff saying after the talk, he was like, the move to a global array, like he hadn't been on board initially, but after the talk, he realized that the move to a global array was conceptually the same it was an iteration of the same move of going from sensations to the optic flow.
Yeah.
About looking for the higher order relations, looking for the structure, where the structure is, and chasing it to the point where there was actually something that you could point to and identify a lawful relationship. And so you had to go from sensations to optic flow before you could do that for vision. The one thing about the global array, though, that worries me is that it's not clear where these things come together. Mm-hmm. So I said to Tom once, so is the medium for the global optic array the nervous system? And he nearly had a stroke. So
he was like, representation. Yeah.
I'm surprised people haven't run with that more, that idea. People have been interested in multi-sensory integration for a long time. It's troubled psychologists forever. How to when you see something that tells you different than what you hear, how do you combine them? You weight them, Bayesian, and this is an alternative to that very radically. And if you think about it, like in your brain, if you want to talk about what your brain is doing, it's all the same stuff. It's all reduces to electrical signals bouncing around your brain, no matter what sense it came in, right?
Yep.
So it's kind
that's it, right? When I said that, I suggested that the nervous system is the medium for a global array. I wasn't joking. Tom didn't want any part of it because he's good old-fashioned and there's no such thing as a brain in his theory. But as we start to do ecological neuroscience and start to think about the key to an ecological neuroscience is what is the nervous system doing? It's resonating to information. Mm-hmm. And as you were saying, Marianne, there's redundancy and degeneracy, and it's all the same kind of stuff. So by the time it gets into the nervous system, the fact that it's haptic versus visual is actually neither here nor there in some sense, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not that you have two different things that must be brought together. You just have a bunch of stuff that's the same kind of thing, but you could actually find relationships between those, right?
Yeah. It was different ways of picking up the same information.
But it's gone nowhere. The idea, no one's picked it up. Tom's had a couple of papers where he's tried to investigate it. I don't think anyone else has picked it at all, but this notion of multisensory integration is not something that we talk about at this point because
it was all the rage for a while. And it got Bayesian model were the biggest one.
Is it worth just picking up on what it is? Because he talks about, was it the 4 different things that we're picking up? Was that in there? It was almost like where we are in relation to the environment.
Oh, the different extra.
Where the things are in the environment. How we're moving in relationships to the environment. He kind of has these different things. And again, some of those, which is what made me think about what was happening with me walking on, very slippy and changeable surfaces, was that it felt integrated, but I was very aware that some of this information must be visual. Some of it is definitely, because I'm not looking at the ground under my feet, but I'm very aware instantly that I put my foot down, I know. So friction's an interesting one because friction doesn't exist until two surfaces come in contact. So actually there's no visual information ahead of time. No. It's so important.
As you read your Andrew's blog on slipping on ice.
That's why I fell over and broke my wrist 10 years ago, 12 years ago, whenever it was.
Really what I thought of it.
Yeah. So it's extero, proprio, exproprio, and proprio exo specificity. Those 4 different things. And that's what I got from that actually with all of those, as we move around the environment, those are all things that are important, but we might be picking up information through different perceptual systems, but they're not separate. We're not patching them together the internal representation.
That's a topic that's really ripe for some careful ecological attention, I think. I think Tom's notion of a global array is a in some ways it's a good first draft, but I think there's more to do there and more to say there, but some careful attention on how these things will work.
Yeah.
But also, we might not be ready to have the conversation yet because we're still dabbling around in the kiddie pool a little bit when it comes to
the basics. Yeah.
Basics, visual information or haptic information, right? Like, and trying to, I've had some ideas for if I can ever get someone to build me some powered joysticks that I can control to do coordinated rhythmic movement stuff with haptics and vision crossed. Like, I've done a little bit of it, but it's really hard, right? Manipulating haptic information is really difficult.
It's very difficult, yeah.
So maybe it needs some attention, but maybe we're not ready for it yet. And that's okay as well, right? Maybe we need to just spend a little bit of time working our way up towards it, regardless of how exciting it is.
Yeah. One of the things I like, he keeps emphasizing, like some of the quotes in it, when properly understood, information and energy are reciprocal aspects of nature.
Yes.
Like optical information that is detected is related to the energy that is controlled. They're almost they're both, everything's energy in a sense, right?
Yeah.
Information is energy, right? It's light energy or gravity, and so the idea that when we expend energy, we change the information we receive, right? And when information tells us about the energy we need to expend to achieve some importance, But I think and he brings in the concept of Mobius strip, the idea of which I don't know if that helps people understand or not. It is a nice analogy, but
he claims that it does. But yes, I think you're right. But also, he's pointing to some older work from like Turvey, but also Bob Shaw. This was his big thing, I think, in the 80s, talking about symmetries and talking about these duals. So not a dualism where you've got two things of different kinds, but dualities where you have two things of the same kind that are intrinsically connected to one another through some lawful transformation. And the argument is that perception and action form this dual. They're two sides of the Mobius strip, right? But they're like you can't have one without the other, for example, and it doesn't make any sense to talk about them separately. And they are related to one another in a way that's basically compulsory, right? Like, and it's a necessary complementarity there, which is actually that's really important, right? This is why organisms evolve the way they do. Why? Because the light is the way it is, or the information is the way it is, right? So, and that tight reciprocity, that necessary reciprocity, is why action succeeds as often as it does. Right? Not an accident that we're good at moving around. Yeah. It's like it almost couldn't be any other way.
Yeah, because it's that way around, isn't it? I think that really, like, the information's there, and species have evolved to become attuned to that information.
And and so like why information? Well, because information is based in laws that enables the kind of stable and flexible and adaptive activity and reproducible activity that is required to get an evolutionary foothold and stuff. And then also there's that whole other thermodynamic argument from earlier on saying that this is another way of I mean, there's implications here for the evolution of systems and why they are the way they are, right? And the idea that it couldn't be any other way. Like you might try a couple of different other ways, but those other ways will immediately die because they're just not good enough, right? But once you figure this reciprocity out, then you're off to the races, right?
And then we get into what will occur versus what might occur, which made me smile when I first read it and thought, ooh, predictive processing, no. And then that interesting, he's quite specific, which I loved, and I've nicked it to go into the paper I'm writing at the moment about the difference between Bernstein's sort of physiology and the idea that organisms are, acting, and they're not just reacting to, but they are acting, intentionally within their environments, as being different from sort of Pavlov's reflex stuff.
Oh yeah.
me was, like for me that was really keen. That they're, what do you say? They understood to be, where is it? They're not just collections.
Yes. Rather than simply reacting to triggering stimuli, organisms cleverly exploit the information about their surroundings and their movements to control their actions, both retrospectively, after the fact, and prospectively, before the fact. So this is the tricky, right? We can we take in what we've done and use it to do something different in the future without memory, and we can act towards the future without predicting or planning.
Yeah.
Right, which always gives people makes their head hurt, right? Right.
Yes.
That's
yes.
perspective, yeah.
Yeah. And he gets into this in 24, doesn't he? This.
And he said the difference between an expectation of what might occur and the specification of what might occur.
Yeah, what will occur. And so there's a nice phrase from a paper by Bootsmo called the current future, right?
He says talks about that at the end, doesn't he? Yeah, the current future is the last.
Yeah, that's I love that.
So Fagins latched onto this quote as well because it's a nice way of sort of talking about the information that is currently available to you specifies what will happen next.
Nothing else changes.
If the testament dynamics don't change. If things continue to proceed the way they have been proceeding, this is what will come next. And so you've got current access through information to the future, right? Why? And again, it's because things unfold in a lawful manner out in the world. Because the information about those things unfolding lawfully is also lawful, right? Again, it's laws, right? Laws, you wouldn't get any of this, right? And then he's pointing out that it has to be this way because the whole section about the problem of induction is predicting the future, expectation of what might occur, trying to figure out on the basis of past experience what's going to happen next is an example of induction. And the problem with induction is you always run the risk of being wrong. Right? You just can't generate enough previous activity to be definitely right about things, right? So if we were operating on the basis of induction, we'd be screwed.
Yeah.
Again, and he gives some nice examples, didn't he, of different things like predation. Well, I would think escaping from being predated is also quite important.
Yes.
Catching a ball.
I do think we miss the point here sometimes, right? We don't have, these are laws, right? We don't have very many laws in psychology, things that are unbreakable, like the truth, right? They're telling you irrefutable facts about what's unfolding in front of you.
If there is a surface coming towards you, then there is Tao, right? Like in an illuminated room, rather than there is Tao. And therefore, if there is Tao, there is a surface coming towards you, right, at a certain rate, and with a time to contact, that link is unique to the ecological approach, and it's critical. It's the thing everybody else needed but couldn't get by bootstrapping their way up, so they had to eventually blame God or prior probabilities, whichever one you prefer. But appeal to laws. Yeah, that's it.
And it doesn't just, I think his point, it doesn't just tell you what is, that something's coming at you. It tells you what the current future is. It tells you about action, like if you continue to stand here and this thing's it's going to hit you in the head, right?
Or in 2.3 seconds, right?
How and when,
If you're picking up those 4 different types of information, you'll know if it's you moving, the environment moving. That's the bit. Those 4 things let you know.
All the things you need to know to successfully regulate your activity, right?
Yeah, to avoid all.
Yeah. When I first read that, it's such stark contrast to the way we typically present visual information in perception, right? The retinal image is upside down, it's blurry, it's degraded, blah blah blah. Turvey, there's so much richness in the information. That's what he's trying to emphasize. It's the opposite of what, right? Not only is it impoverished, it's got everything. It's got so many things more than just telling you what is. It's telling you what was, what will be, what if you.
And there's information about a lot of different things. So, when he's introducing Tao, one of the things I hadn't quite thought about, but is a nice example of this, on page 374, there's a little diagram where when you stand up, there's a bunch of towels. He calls them a field of towels. And there's a bunch of towels that become available to you as you stand up that depend on where the surface is relative to you, right? And so, like, standing up, there's a structured field of towels that gives you all kinds of information about the layout, the layout of the surfaces in your environment. And that's just one of the ways in which the optic array is busy telling you about the layout of the surfaces in your environment. There's actually a bunch of other things also going on. So this is the other thing, is that we study these things one variable at a time. We talk about the variable for, and that, when actually the problem that we're actually, or the thing that we're actually trying to explain is that my eyes are picking up a bajillion different things, I don't know how many, at multiple different spatial and temporal scales. That's the fractal and multifractal thing, right? It's picking up all of them. Well, it's picking up many of them, and I'm using and coordinating my behavior with respect to a lot of them, right? Or, relations between them and so on and so. So, that's it. And because of that, that's why my behavior is so robust.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've always loved the idea of the field of towels. I always wanted someone to take like an image from like someone riding a mountain bike. And you could have lots of the towel with the tree, the towel with that rock, and as they come critical, they turn red. I think that'd be very informative of how we act. If we could,
it made me think of Karen Adolf. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Mary.
Oh, it made me think of Karen Adolph's work though as well. When she talks about what happens when babies start to change, so they go from swimming to crawling to sitting to standing, and then that field of towels changes, and actually things open up that just didn't exist for them there. But also the reason why they can't just move straight away from crawling down a slope to walking down it.
Yeah. Yes.
Need to recalibrate a little bit.
There's multiple learning curves, and as your ability to interact with the environment changes, then you get access to different things, because sometimes you have to move in certain ways. You have to move in certain ways for a towel to be defined, for example, right?
So the sitting, standing, moving quicker, moving slower, all those things actually start to change that field of towels. I say that field of towels.
Then we have a comment like about the another thing, specification is a law, right? It's saying that this could only happen for this. It's not like might be. This might be associated with this event or that event. It's telling it what is.
But that's it. So again, just to highlight, that's the Turvey notion of specification, and I think it's really important. I think it's really true. The ecological psychologists who are more enactivist flavored, and I've had this conversation with people like Ludger and Rob Withergen and stuff. When you say it's the law that makes something specify, they want to get specification out of other things because they don't want to rely on the law, and it doesn't work. There's a difference, right? There's a difference between one thing specifying another thing and another, or one thing being 100% co-varying with it, right? A correlation of 100% and one thing specifying another thing are not necessarily the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Oh, Greg's put, where does imagination fit in?
No idea. Greg, sorry.
We're still stuck. We're still in the.
Not there yet.
And then the next chapter 25, we got into it a little bit. We're getting more into haptics, right? We're talking about dynamic touch, all the things specified. I've been reading a lot about this lately for some of the stuff I'm doing, but the inertia information.
Yeah.
Wow. Turvey did amazing work, and amazing set of him, Solomon and Turvey go through the set of experiments. And Turvey's idea, I don't know if most people realize how far he took this. The idea that you can perceive the million affordances from simply wielding an object. You can figure out how long it is, what it's attached to it, what you can reach with it. But Turvey, where he heads with it eventually is, he argues that's the information from how we perceive our body too. It's the same information as you holding an object. Yeah. Right?
And he talked about it. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Marian.
No, he talked about it with a cane, didn't he? That when you use a cane, like somebody who's blind uses a cane, they perceive the end of the cane. They don't perceive it. fascinating. They're reading the environment at the
So
end.
I'm touching that surface with my glasses there, and my experience is that the physical contact with the surface is at the end of my glasses, not at the end of my hand, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's almost like extended, which is fascinating. That also made me think about some of the stuff that Lauren Mosley did around pain and perception, which probably, you know, where he sets up these things where somebody's got like they put glasses on so you see somebody else being, you know,
like phantom limb stuff and
they
virtual
see it externally. They go, ouch, where did it hurt? Over there. Like, it's not even on me, but I'm yeah.
And look,
fascinating.
Yeah.
I know it's complicated to point to brain stuff, but one of the things that's well known in brain things, in brain sort of circles, is if you look at the receptive fields for, you know, that are sensitive to information coming from your fingers, for example, and if you give someone an object and get them to wield it for a little bit, those receptive fields change to accommodate a new object, right? And it is from the point which makes complete sense from this point of view, right? Your if I put a stick into my hand and spend a little bit of time moving with that, then from the point, and my nervous system simply accommodates to this new flow of information, literally my hand has become longer.
Yeah.
Like it's not, and that's in a quite an important sense.
Yeah.
That's literally perceptually what has occurred, which is a wild thing to say in some ways, right?
Yeah.
But it's, you know, it's one of the things I do like is that, you know, even with good old-fashioned neuroscience methods, you literally see that change happen in the receptive fields.
And that is how we feel it. Ditto with a pair of skis on, or paddling a boat, or riding a horse. That we.
So there's a parallel to the visual information we were just talking about, right?
Yep.
In this case, we're talking. The information is inertia, the resistance to rotation, movement.
The inertia is not the information. The inertia tensor is it's the dynamic property being perceived. It's the source of information.
Yes, you're right.
The information is in the deformations of the haptic array.
Yeah, you're right. In the actual,
that's
how we can describe it. Yeah, you're right.
Turvey doesn't make this mistake, but the dynamic touch literature, since about 20 years ago, has started making this mistake. And Turvey never made this. So the inertia tensor is the thing being perceived.
Yes, you're
but
right.
It's not the information variable. It's the thing that creates the information variable.
Tending to extend by a certain, which you can't. This is why it's so hard to do haptics, right? You know, it's hard. How do we measure that actual information? It's very, very.
He kind of, because he talks about deformation of haptics as well, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And so he's using similar for you to understand things like direct, talk and stuff. Deformation and optic flow.
Yeah, deformation is a thing that can happen in the optic array, but it's a thing that can also happen in the body.
Yeah. And the other thing with that is he talks about that actually haptic is throughout the whole body. It's almost like the biggest sensory organ we have, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mm.
He talks about, how you can perceive properties of objects by exploring them. With a stick, you can perceive whether you can climb up something. It's not the most efficient way to do it, but you can the same
and you can get to the same property of the object through different exploratory modes, right?
Yeah.
So
redundancy thing.
Yeah. So again, it's not the pattern, it's not the stimulation that's telling you what's going on. It's the invariance revealed by the exploration. And there is more than one way to get to the same invariant. But the reason why your experience of the same property is the same is because the invariant is the same. You just got there through a couple of different exploratory movements. Which is a brilliant way of making a really good point about the fact that perception is specific to information, right?
He says the information.
It's really good way to understand the link between attention, education of attention, right? It's easier than vision, right? When I ask you how hot is that thing, you do explore it differently than if you ask you what shape it is. I went to Queen, so I had Susan Lederman. She did haptic, how you explore, right? So there's a direct link between what your intention is, pick something up, right, as how you gather the information. You can see it more and easier in vision, where you envision you don't. You look at different things and things, but it does.
Could I throw that? Will it be gripping? Different things. Because I think he says something around, I put in my note that the perception that information is free of the peculiarities of the perceptual system that picked it up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which again goes back to invariant information in the environment, or lawful information in the environment.
So for example, I do coordinated rhythmic movement stuff, and I can visually perceive the relative phase between these things, but I can also close my eyes and haptically perceive the relative phase. Why? Because I can visually access the information, relative direction, but I can also haptically engage with the information. And so it's the same variable. That's why the experience is the same. But it's implemented in light, implemented in my body in the other, but that's not the point.
Yeah.
Right. And again, that's why, it's why virtual reality is an option. You can, as long as you create the right information, like that's, virtual reality is an option, but it's difficult in the sense that if you create the right information, the visual experience is the same, but it's really difficult to create the right information unless you're working it properly. But it's perception is specific to the information, not to anything else.
Yeah, I like the way his use of the word incorrigible.
Yes.
I did have to look up a word. I can't remember which one it is now, though. I should have written it down, shouldn't I?
I've had a few along the way. Yeah.
And diachrony. I hadn't come across that before.
I don't know where that was.
It was in chapter 24 when he talked about, oh gosh, I've jotted it down and not made a note about what the context was. It wasn't very good, was it? I was like, I haven't heard of that word. I think he was talking about the way things relate. So synchrony is together, isn't it? And diachrony is over long periods of time.
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
There's a good one I like. He's talking about audition, actually, but it's getting back to the sensory. If the information contained in the radiating acoustic waveforms can be detected, then a listener can, in principle, hear what an object looks like.
Yeah.
Which
echolocation. Echolocation, isn't it? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Where was it? I do.
So it's breaking down these.
Yeah. So not many people study hearing because, again, it's difficult. These Gaver papers from the 90s are really interesting, where he just kind of lays out the sort of the preliminaries of the acoustic array and the kinds of things that it can implement. Because that's the other thing, right, is that you can have the same information variable implemented in lots of different arrays, but not always. So, so it's not the case that they're completely overlapping. There are things that the haptic system can do that vision can't, and vice versa, right? That's why we have all of them, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's some work, I got involved in this. There's acoustic equivalent to tau, obviously.
Yes.
There's work, some people have applied it to designing warning systems and things like that. But
it was in Taylor's theorem when he talks about what happens in an instant, which is synchrony, that like the interaction of what happens at an instant can get converted into which is what happens over a series of instances, which then leads into the leads into the current future. I know we're back into the chapter. Just I remembered having to look it up.
So there were a couple of nice things. Sorry, we've been bouncing around a little bit. There are a couple of nice things on the mechanical basis chapter 25. There's a couple of nice things that he points out where he's talking about some key sort of necessities for getting moving on this. One of them was about the fact that the inertia and tensor is the important kind of thing to be perceived, and that it's rather than anything else, right? So, and the idea that information isn't tied to the peculiarities of the medium. It's if the medium can implement it, then you're off to the races. There was just one other thing that the first thing that he points out to just gets back to something you were talking about earlier, Marianne. He was just talking about the three necessities for getting this lecture underway. The first is the recognition of the commonplace nature of dynamic, effortful touch, and talks about here's all the words that we have in English to talk about this term.
Yeah,
it gets back to the point of this effortful touch thing. It's not a thing that happens in the lab. It's not a thing you have to very carefully extract out in order to identify. It's just everywhere in all the things that you do. And that's what psychology should actually, of course, be paying attention to. Not the edge cases where stuff breaks, but the 50 million cases where it didn't break and the different flavors of that, right? So shaking, lifting, hefting, wielding, pushing, pulling, probing, pressing, et cetera, right? There's so many different things that involve these kinds of mechanical interactions that produce this kind of information. So again, it just gets back to that point of, what is psychology supposed to be interested in? What are we studying? Let's study the things we do all the time successfully. Not, we do them differently every time because of all the various features, but you know what? We successfully and frequently and repeatedly do these things over and over again in a way that doesn't cause any disaster. And that's what we should be trying to explain. That's the great, it's the fun thing about EcoPsych, right? I think is that we're just explaining the stuff we do every day.
Yeah. And with, unless we're in space or, like we're always touching something, aren't we? We're connected.
Yeah, the work on just
not landing at speed.
Static touch from just how it helps balance, right? Just touch below the level of you actually, being able to support you at all. Things like that.
This thing that I just did to have a drink is like I'm doing a lot. Like I'm managing, like I'm anticipating and managing and wrangling all kinds of reactive forces in order to be able to hold on to this thing, but not in a way that fatigues my arm, or not in a way that breaks the glass, or not in a way that allows the glass to slip. And I'm doing it all at the same time while this non-symmetrical object is moving, so the forces are all over the place.
Yeah, its weight is changing as you keep drinking.
I drink the water, right? So, and I'm doing it like it's, I've done it multiple times in this podcast successfully without coming anywhere close to failing. I'm quite proud of myself. Right? It's because there's water in here and not wine, right? But
that's a whole other.
But again, like this feels really commonplace, and of course it is, because it's literally commonplace. You do it all the time. But that's what we're trying to, that's what he's saying is the reason it's commonplace actually is because it's all grounded in laws. That's why it's complex. If these things, the things that aren't grounded in laws are the uncommon things, the things that are difficult to do, that you're not able to do repeatedly.
Yeah. Good.
Where does he go?
Anything else, Jim? I think he covers a lot in this. Even gets into smart perceptual mechanisms. He does a little bit. Covers a lot in these two chapters. A lot of the things, the whole chapter itself.
Well, actually, so there is one thing in there. So in the section he's talking about smart perceptual mechanisms, right? He notices, a prosaic but stunning human capability is that on provision of a given intent in the form of a task, e.g. perceive object property pi, a person can effectively assemble her or himself into a smart instrument that serves just that purpose. So if I give you a stick and ask you how long is it versus, I don't know, can you reach something? Whatever. Like, oh, right. So, I can with verbal instruction make you attend to different parts of the informational array, right? So there's two things that were interesting in there. One is that he notes that this dynamic touch literature has enabled us to study this, right? Like you can talk about how you can direct the attention through the array to get to different properties, and that one of the things we can do is temporarily assemble ourselves into a device that is capable of answering that question. But the thing that's again, the intention is provided through a verbal instruction from the researcher. And one of the things that we don't actually yet have a good handle on is how intentionality works outside of that. Right? When I bring a participant into the lab, I always set the task for them. I always set the intentionality. But when I'm out and about in the world, I'm setting the intentionality for myself. And so the question is, I just want to stick a pin in the fact that we talk about intentionality. It comes up, gets acknowledged. We talk about how important it is. We're trying to make it so that it's not magical, that it's coherent. It's coming out of the kind of physical system that we are, etc. And that's good. So it's on the agenda, but I just want to stick a pin in the fact that we don't actually have a very good account of it at all.
Education of intention.
Intention.
Yeah. But it's
nobody
Turvey
studied it.
yeah. There's a great experiment, like exactly what you mentioned. They have people judging length by dynamic wielding, and then in the middle they say start judging width. And you immediately change to a width detector, right?
Yeah.
You tune into different information, you wield it differently.
Yep.
Right. That's education of attention, right? You're picking
Well,
different information.
that's I don't know though. I think in that case, the intentionality has been changed by a loan of intelligence.
Yes, yeah, but externally. Yep.
You've borrowed some intelligence from the researcher and used that to switch the intentionality.
Yeah.
The question is, how does that normally work without a verbal instruction?
Yes.
We
But
don't
it's
have a
causing
story.
you to pick up different information.
Yeah, so you can switch. We can demonstrate a switch of intentionality, but we don't yet know how intentionality self-organizes. Let's think about it that way, right?
Where do intentions come from?
Yeah. So in the direct learning framework, Jacobs and Michaels, they talk about the education of intention and the education of attention, and then they talk about calibration. And all of the empirical work is on the education of attention and calibration. Once you have an intentionality, once you have a task, what variables do you attend to? Nobody directly studies how you go about having that intentionality in the first place. I think it's a fascinating question. I just like to talk about it, but that we don't know how to study it yet. So if anyone's out there who knows how to do it, yes, probably need.
In chapter 23, I don't know whether this is right, he talks a lot about what they mean by intentional behavior. I think I was through there, and he said that Shaw and Casella Shaw, they talk about intentional, not meaning that it's chosen, but that it refers beyond itself. And there's, I did remember, I noted that, and I probably is something to go back and have a look, because I'd noted that Turvey's actually quite. It's almost like he's trying to start that.
Maybe.
Conversation definition on what do we mean when we talk about animals having intentionality, or I mean, again with the Bernstein-Pavlov thing as well, doesn't he?
I definitely think some of the preliminaries exist in the literature. I just think that they haven't been tied together yet into a coherent framework. That's my sense anyway. I might be wrong. Like if there's stuff out, I think you're definitely right that there's bits and pieces of people talking about what we mean by intentionality, for example, is a pretty important part of this story for sure.
Yeah. I think it's like where you were talking about affordances at the starting, Andrew. I think it's something that gets a little abused. Like everything we can't explain gets thrown into intention, and it gets, you gotta stick to.
There's maybe messiness to it, that, again, like the colloquial use of the word in the same way there is for what we mean by, well, that's my perception, or perception that's.
Yes.
Those things to be anyway, good chapters.
All right. Yeah, really good. So we got one more left.
One thing I just want to flag up again. Don't talk about that. In the chapter 25, Turvey talks about the case of Ian Waterman.
Oh yeah.
Yes. I learned this from Jeff. Right. So Ian Waterman suffered a complete loss of proprioception from the neck down. Right. So all the incoming nerve fibers got destroyed. I can't remember what it was. It was some virus or something.
Cutting. He was a butcher, wasn't he? And he got cut in work.
Got some infection. Basically rampaged through his nervous system. So basically, what happened was that he had no incoming, no haptic information coming in. And so there's a BBC documentary about it. I've used clips of it in lecture before. I was trying to find it on YouTube again, but I can't track it down. There's a documentary.
Jeff of the documentary.
There's a book as well called Pride in the Daily Marathon, but it's written by a neuropsychologist, I think, who brought it, rather than an ecological psychologist. But lots of ecological psychologists have read this and sort of pulled some lessons out. There's a bunch of fascinating things that are well worth getting into if people want to go and have a look at the story. He learned how to use vision to substitute for some aspects of proprioception. He was able to use his eyes to track the movement of his legs, to control the timing of his steps, etc. And so if you if you turned the lights off on him, he would fall over because it would, so he was able to relearn to do a lot of things. There were a bunch of things he couldn't relearn how to do because there's some things vision can't do that haptics can do. It was also really effortful. It took him a long time. Yeah. So there's all kinds of interesting questions about what's the boundaries of that degeneracy across different systems, and what
Yeah,
can you do and what can't you learn to do, and how, so
And
anyway, I just wanted to flag up that Turvey just brings it up, and he had it was really difficult losing that haptic system. He was able to replace quite a lot of it, but not having it was a real problem because it lost access to all these mechanical events. So anyway, just to flag, it's a fascinating story. Like, well worth it if people want to look at it.
The original film, I think it was called The Man Who Lost His Body, is the one.
The film, okay.
Man Who Lost His Body. And I mean, just things like he would put himself into, like a really low squat position to try and pick up something, even as small as an egg or groceries, because he couldn't feel weight. All the haptic stuff he couldn't do. But yeah, absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
Did he say if the world was a cricket pitch, it would be heaven or pavement something? And if
he's trying to walk it up pebbles.
Yeah, well worth watching. I must watch it again. I haven't got a video cassette that plays these really old fashioned.
Post it off to some service, get it digitized, and we'll put it on YouTube or something.
Yeah, we'll watch it. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah, I've never seen the whole thing. I've only ever seen bits and pieces, but
I'll try and get a copy. Yeah, like I say, I have got a VHS copy, and it's well worth watching. It was just blew my mind. So I watched it in the 90s, and kept it. It's one of the few things I've kept on tape.
No.
I found it so. Yeah.
I have to dig it up too. I've seen bits and pieces of it, but it's fascinating. The last chapter we have next time is strong anticipation. I strongly anticipate talking about strong anticipation. This is, I really like this idea. Some of it's a bit tricky, but it's this space. We're talking about. Well, I like Turvey starts by telling the strict definition of what anticipation means is acting towards the future. There's nothing about predicting the future,
right?
Which is what perspective control does, right? It acts towards the future. So, some future state it centers you on. So it's going to be quite easy for him to, but there's going to be some interesting ideas, and
and then a bit of a review,
and then we can wrap it all up. So we are going to figure out another book hopefully soon. So, but so maybe we'll leave it there, guys.
Cool.
Thanks everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks. All right. Yes. Yeah.